Hello? Hello. I don't see anyone else yet, do you?
No, no one else is here yet.
Do you do enter full screen? Yeah, that's what I'll do. And then,
Usually it just kind of does it, I think.
yeah, I put you on.
It starts recording like as soon as
Mhm.
you sign on.
It's so funny to do from my house. I'd rather be in person. Uh,
I'm just so used to Zoom now that I'm like, oh, this is
good.
like,
I
yeah.
feel like I always have to be smiling and looking alert. And oh, hi, Luch.
So he'll connect and then he'll like put the
Mhm.
camera, so that you guys can usually see. But I don't know. I never know how big my face is like when I'm there. I saw it once and I was like, whoa, hi.
We're on the whole, like, I think that whole thing.
The whole thing.
Big. I'm like, anything in my teeth? No? Okay.
What's up, guys?
So usually I always put my headphones in because there's so many things going on.
Yeah. I have to mute it if my dogs bark.
I know that's what I do. Like if it gets loud or anything, I'll just mute quick sometimes, just so that.
You gotta do it. Very good. I hope I can explain this well.
You will be fine.
If you can't, you won't get paid, so it's okay.
Eric, can I ask you a quick question, or should we wait till everyone comes in?
Sure.
Okay, because I just want to be able to explain it properly and not make a mistake. So when it says it's like the middle part, so an agreement to purchase the property was entered into within 6 months after the termination of this agreement and or any extensions or renewal. So does that mean, is it only if, because there's an and like high, bolded, and it says the buyer was introduced to the property during the term of this contract. So is it only if you like showed them the property that would be entered in, or like what if they saw say that the contract ended and then we never showed them a property and they went out and bought a property, would they still owe?
Not if they were not in contract at the time they saw it.
Okay.
So in your example, if the contract ended and then they saw it, then they're not going to owe you a fee.
So then this 6 months after termination is only if we showed them a property and say like they put in an offer, it wasn't, something happened or whatever, they saw the property with us.
In theory, if they saw the property at any time while they were under contract with us, it's called a protection clause.
Okay.
So in other words, what we're trying to avoid is to have you go out and see them or cause them to go see a property and then they wait out the contract and then they go buy it thinking they're not going to owe you anything.
That's what I thought, but I just wanted to make sure it wasn't like for 6 months you can't go buy anything even if you didn't see the property. But okay,
right.
Thank
you. Okay.
Thank you.
No problem. Hello.
Hello. I still go back in the morning.
Oh, okay.
Hi, guys.
Hello.
Hello. I was a little 2 o'clock came up on me. I wasn't able to go to the bathroom.
You better run.
Okay.
So there's a penalty if you're late.
It's 2:02.
You're wasting time.
It's everybody else's time that's not valuable, right? Do we want to wait or get started? Your choice.
I don't mind waiting.
Let's.
Julie, wait or start?
We can wait.
Jessica, wait or start?
We can wait. We can wait. We can talk about some other things that might help.
Waiting for questions.
All right. The big
Eric, sorry. Go ahead.
No. Go ahead.
Eric, how would you even start to bring it up? When you're going through the contract, do you want us to kind of go through how we went through the disclosure, the Massachusetts Mandatory Real Estate Licensee Consumer Relationship Disclosure Form?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
I guess like, because we have to explain this, we have to go through the contract, and because, you know, we're going to obviously going through 1 through 5 before we get to the payment portion of it when we're explaining, even though this is like, you know, the most uncomfortable part to explain to the buyer. Do you just kind of like, can you kind of make a joke like, oh, everyone needs to get paid, so here's how we get paid, I know you're wondering, like something like that, and get into it? Or
It's whatever you're comfortable with. I guess it's debatable whether my jokes are funny, but I attempt humor, just because it makes me more comfortable to talk about it and to try to break that ice about an uncomfortable situation, right? Who wants to talk about the money up front, because you're going to scare them off is really what, you know, the big fear is, right? So
exactly.
yeah, it's just a matter of kind of jumping in and pulling the Band-Aid off, but doing it in a way that's, you know, approachable and personable, and you don't want to place too much emphasis on it, but you got to have the conversation, because if you don't, they'll inevitably say, you never told me that. And even when you tell them that and they read it and then they sign it, there's still going to be times when they say, you never told me about this. So we want to make sure that that you're establishing a pattern of communication with them, because it would be atypical, right? We want them to be able to say, haven't I communicated with you all the way along if there's a question at the end of all this? And didn't we go over this and this and this? And then they're going to say, yes, yes, yes. Well, how is it that I would leave that one piece out? Right? You're saying I didn't. I was never trained to do it that way. And I'd make sure that I touch base on every single paragraph of every single contract that you and I are going to sign together, or disclosures that you and I are going to sign together. And any contract, AKA an offer that you're going to sign that I write up for you, I'm going to go over with you before you sign it. So there's a pattern of behavior, which is what I'm trying to create for you. It's the not necessarily the pattern, it's the habit, but it's a pattern when you get up in front of the judge, as I like to say. When you get up in front of the judge, you have to be able to say, look, this is what I do every single time. Why wouldn't I have done it with them? In fact, they signed it and this and that ultimately becomes part of your argument, and becomes part of your credibility. And then they're going to bring me up on the stand and say, Eric, you know, Jessica said that you train a very specific way and that you teach them to do it this way, and I'm going to reiterate everything that you just said.
Okay.
Right? So, but you got to have the conversation. You can't. So before we each go through paragraph 6, I wrote 2 questions up on the board that I thought were relevant. How do I get paid? And what is my value? And what's the relationship between those two questions? Don't all jump at once now.
I just wanted to mention the connection's a little it's choppy. I can't hear very well. I don't know why. I don't know if it's my internet or something like that, but it's going in and out.
Julie, is it you too as well?
No, I think it might be your internet, Jess, because I can hear okay.
Okay, now it's clear actually.
Talk. Okay.
You were joking that time, weren't you?
Right, I was. Okay.
Actually, I unmuted myself and now it's fine. So maybe when I mute myself, it's like that. I don't know.
That could be because sometimes when the microphone is picking up on the background noise as well, it'll get very spotty that way. So I'd say remain on mute. We'll expect a delay. So, but what's the relationship between those 2 questions? Because there's a direct correlation. Wouldn't you agree?
You get paid
I get
on the value. Right?
Did everybody hear that? And does everybody agree with that?
It's what services you're providing and the extent of how much you think that's worth in your time. So.
And wouldn't you agree? I would agree with that. And wouldn't you agree it's with your ability to get paid has everything to do with you being able to communicate what your value is. You got to tell these people what your value is up front, and then you got to meet or exceed that expectation, right? And again, I always go back to my prior life when I was in the hotel business, and I've used the example in this class. You know, you can stay, if you boil down the basics of a hotel stay, it's you're basically putting your head on a pillow for 6 or 8 hours, getting up and on to the next, right? You can go do that at the Four Seasons and it's gonna cost you $600 to do that for one night, or you can go do it at the Marriott Courtyard and it's gonna cost you $150 a night. What's the difference? Besides $450. What's the difference?
Service.
Service. And what does that mean?
Your experience, your stay.
Okay, the experience, the overall experience, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
The attention you get.
the attention you get from who?
In the hotel employees, in this case, your buyer's agent.
Okay,
The individual attention.
okay. Has anybody ever stayed or gone to a Four Seasons or a 5-star hotel? Okay. Have you ever walked in the front door of that hotel? And what do the doormen say? Every single one of them.
Good morning.
Welcome back. Good to see you again. Even if they've never met you.
And if they're
Okay.
having to do it by name, that's when they're good.
Yeah, and then what happens if you've been there before? I can literally, I worked at the Four Seasons for 6 years. I stopped working in 1996. I can go walk up to that front door and somebody's gonna say, Eric, good to see you again, how are you? Okay, and as a guest, how does that make you feel? Wow, that kind of blows you away, right? So it is really about that experience. And what's that value? And if you think about it, I want to relate now from a hotel experience to how we're set up here, right? We, Lillian, built this office for a very specific reason, right? You may or may not have seen our old office. It wasn't so bad, was it, Luch?
It's pretty bad.
It was pretty bad, what?
I mean, it was ancient.
It was ancient, but in terms of its decor, it still was
Yeah. I mean,
outdressed every other real estate office ever.
Yeah.
Right, and so, oh, we lost, yes, we got it.
Yes. I changed to my phone because it's much clearer. I couldn't hear you.
No
Sorry
problem.
about
So one of the things that why Lillian built this building the way that it was so that when people walk in, they get the sense that this is something different. It's not your typical real estate office, right? And most people, I think you would all agree, walk in and go, this is pretty nice. What's going on here, right? She also built the organization and made sure that the guest experience was consistent from client to client or customer to customer because of the way we set up the operating departments and how they support the salespeople and the handoff. And you know, there's 100. How many things are on the listing checklist? A lot, right? But it's the same one for every. It's the same checklist for every listing. And within that listing, we built in certain touch points for the staff to reach out and or follow up with the customer. Why? Or the client. Why? Because we want that interaction. And so when we talk about this team atmosphere, our concept of a team is a lot different than everybody else's. Okay, you can go have fun with the Deb Lucci team or the Peggy Patnaugh team or whatever team you want, but they're never going to provide you the level of service and the consistency that we can, because we've been doing it for a lot longer and we do it on a scale that they can't. Right? We're going to close 400 transactions this year. We're going to have listed well over 400 or 500 properties this year. Everybody had a very similar, same experience because we built the process to be able to build in value. So what's your value? It's not just about you and what you bring to the table and your market knowledge and negotiating skill. It's about the environment of the office. It's about the experience that you're going to have with Crystal. How many times have you walked in the building and Crystal said, welcome back? Almost every time, if she's down there. Okay? Don't believe me? Test it out. But that's part of your value, is the things that surround you in this office. So again, I come back to the analogy of the Four Seasons versus the Marriott Courtyard. The analogy is this: in Four Seasons, you generally have 2 staff members for every hotel room. At the Marriott Courtyard, you generally have 1 staff member for every 10 hotel rooms. Okay, so it's no different in the real estate business. I will tell you that if you go look at the larger offices, the office employs one full-time staff member on average for every 10 full-time agents. If that, it may even be up to 20 at this point. When you go over and look at like Remax, they have a receptionist and they have some staff members, but they've got 40 agents, so they've got 3 or 4 full-time staff members. That's aside from any personal assistance that the agents might have, right? We've got 20 agents and you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you've got 6, about to be 7 full-time staff members. So the ratio of the support team to you all as salespeople is a further indication of the level of service that you're going to provide. And you need to know this, because when you say my fee is 3% and the buyer comes back and go, 3%? I've never heard of such a thing. Or why am I paying a fee? I heard the seller pays the fee. You need to be able to have information and be able to justify your value. So the two are inextricably tied together. Does that make sense? Any immediate questions? Who wants to explain paragraph 6 to me? Let's start with Luciano.
So the next section is section 6. This is actually my favorite section
Why is that?
because this is how I get paid.
Awesome.
So our standard fee is 3%, and 9 times out of 10, it's going to be the seller that actually pays that. In the event that the seller's not offering out 3%, you would have to come up with a difference. So if an MLS shows that they're only offering 2.5%, you would have to come up with that additional 0.5% at closing. Does that make sense to you?
I didn't think I was told I didn't have to pay anything.
And most of the time you don't, and I'm going to do everything in my power so that you don't have to pay anything. You know, we could try to have it through closing credits or different things. There's some different things that we can do to try to make it not come out of your pocket. But just in the event that it does have to, I just need to make sure that you're prepared to do that. And if we're putting an offer in on a property, I'll let you know ahead of time if it's going to cost you anything out of your pocket to pay me. Does that make sense?
It does. How do you think you did?
Good.
Would you sign?
Yeah.
The 3%?
I would.
Get them to sign because they may be the only ones.
You guys looking to move?
The description is, I don't think there's anything wrong with the description, but in addition, if you talk more about what we just talked about, just why it's 3%.
You don't
That would
necessarily
be valuable.
have to say that unless they ask. Yeah, there's no reason to
Right,
mention that.
and remember the context of this. So we're taking this paragraph totally out of context of any conversation. Your conversation, if you're doing it right, you've already explained what their responsibilities are and what your responsibilities are. So that's specifically why paragraph 6 is on the back of the page. Because I don't want the focus to be on the payment. And I want you to have already had the discussion about what their responsibilities are and what your responsibilities are. Right? Because if you don't do that, somebody's going to say, wait a second, I'm going to go find the house and I got to pay you 3%. Be ready for that one because it's coming. Okay, Jonathan, give it a whack. Go ahead.
So you don't want us to talk about those things unless asked.
Well, now,
I didn't
now he's
say
gonna,
that.
now he's gonna ask you. So
I didn't say that. Okay, but let's remember that you're in sales. And your job as a salesperson is to do what? Overcome the objections, not create objections. And depending on what you ask, I will always tell you, you need to be in curiosity. If you heard Luciano, what he did do well was he made a statement, but then followed up and said, do you understand, or does that make sense, or whatever, right? My job is to qualify by asking questions. My job is not to create more objections for me to overcome by asking questions. So sometimes the best question is the question you don't ask because it triggers something else.
the other thing too, if you're trying to say why you're worth the 3%, that's just gonna get it in their head. Oh, maybe he thinks that he has to justify 3% because 3% is a lot. But just saying like our standard is 3%. That makes it sound like it's normal. There's nothing wrong with
It's
this.
called blaming it on the third party. Our standard, the company policy is 3%.
And that's technically, that has to be negotiable, right? Legally.
Nothing's negotiable. Why does it have to be negotiable legally?
Maybe I'm getting confused with our commission with the broker. I remember seeing somewhere in my training or classes that commission is legally negotiable, but I don't know if it's between myself and the broker or myself and the client, I don't remember.
I mean, you can go
It's
down
something I
to
remember
two
from
point
months ago.
five, but
I'm curious about this. Did anybody else, does this ring a bell for anybody else about the
You can
fee
stop,
being legally negotiable?
I think it was the Sherman Act?
The
trust?
Sherman antitrust violations?
Yeah,
I think that's, I thought
it was
that's.
part of that, and I think it's basically saying that, yeah,
That you
there's-
can't like overdo it and do anything.
like
You can't,
there's no
take advantage of something.
standard, like a real, like, there is no standard pay, so from brokerage to brokerage, it can be different.
That I like and that I agree with, but there's nothing stating that I can't. I could put 10% in there and be legally fine.
Yeah,
What, am I gonna get anybody to sign with me at 10%? Probably not. But we have charged 10% commissions before on the listing side. Wouldn't that be nice? Okay, but you're right. So Sherman Antitrust, just to touch on it, Sherman Antitrust means that you can't go have a conversation with somebody outside of this office, another licensee outside of this office, and start comparing notes on, hey, what do you charge? And, you know, this is what I charge. Don't anybody starts having that conversation with you, turn around and say, excuse yourself, and just walk away. Because it's probably a tester or it's somebody that's really ignorant, because you cannot have that conversations because it's considered an antitrust violation. And that is not just state, that's federal. That's nasty stuff.
Can you have that conversation with a non-licensed person that's a consumer if they're asking for their own purposes of possibly becoming a client? If you
Well, you're gonna have that discussion all the time, right? When you explain what paragraph 6 is, aren't you having that discussion with them?
yeah, it's not signed yet, so.
Right? Even if it was signed.
and that's not comparing what they make to what you make, you know what I mean, in that
Right.
sense, so.
But you will get they told me they'd only charge me this. I had a gentleman yesterday, 2 days ago. Hi, I'm looking for a real estate agent. What's your fee? What does my fee have to do with finding a real estate agent? Because I want the cheapest real estate agent I can get. So is what you're telling me that you want the agent that is least competent because they're gonna discount their fee just to get the business? No, that's not what I said. Well, I'm sorry. What is it that you said? I want the person that charges the least amount of fee. What's your fee? My fee is just enough to get your house sold. No, really, what's your fee? Just enough to get your house sold. Remember, I need to come see your house and understand what it is you're asking me to do, because guess what? It's possible I might have to charge you more because it's a lot more work. He didn't like the answer. He hung up on me. Okay, next. Not a big deal. Because I know if I start having a discussion about my fee on the phone without having them in front of me, it's all about the money for them. So just to have some fun, I called him back. Right? Because that's the kind of guy that I am. And I said, hey, just want to have another conversation. What if I could show you how I could actually net you more money than the discount broker's fee, who's going to charge you 3 or 4%? I can net you more money with a higher fee. Would that be of interest to you? No, it wouldn't. Okay, thanks. Have a good day. So these are all things that you're going to learn. Okay, but it is about the value. So Jonathan, yes, go ahead.
I was just going to ask you, like, when you're cold calling, do you get people who right off the bat are like, well, what do you charge? What's your fee? I think that's a common right off the bat. How do you kind of deflect it, I guess? Or
Just enough to get your house sold,
yeah. Okay.
right?
or do you ever say, let's get you here in person and we can talk about it?
You can. Again, my preference is remember, people are very price and dollar conscious, right? So you've got to know that going into these conversations. So one, the minute that you're talking about, if all you do is talk about a fee on a conversation, you're never going to get hired, because you're going to say, even if you say my fee 6%, I'll discount it to 5%, they're going to say, well, I want 4%. Okay. So, but when somebody says to Eric, oh, what's your fee? And I deflected it 3 or 4 times. I finally come out and say, okay, it's 6%. Are you willing to negotiate? Absolutely. Would you prefer 7 or 8? Because I only negotiate up, not down. Right? But you've got to know these answers and be comfortable with them and come across as confident in them. Okay, ask Gabrielle, the first listing appointment she went on, and went with her. The seller's mother was a realtor, and she flew up from Florida for the interview. That was fun. It was really enjoyable. I got asked 4 times. And she finally said, no, really, what's your fee? Because I'm making a decision based on fee. I said, it was 6%. She goes, you won't discount? I said, no, I won't discount, but I will negotiate. Okay, what are you going to negotiate? I'll negotiate to 7 or 8. Which would you prefer? You always get a laugh out of it. I've never not gotten a laugh out of it. And I looked at her square away. So I'm going to do you a favor as a courtesy. You were in this business. If you sign right now, I'll do it for 5.5%. If I leave here and you haven't signed, it's 6 when you want to hire me. Okay.
She signed at 5.5.
She sure did. Okay. Now, if you think about what's 0.5% on $100,000
$500.
is what?
$500.
$500, right?
Mhm.
You sure? Just making sure.
Yeah.
Right? So for every $100,000, right? If you're discounting your fee by $500 every time, that's a lot of money over the course of a year. Right?
Especially if it's not
Right. I'm just saying, that's my point, is you've got to recognize, so if you're at a $500,000 property, now that's $2,500. And if you're at $1 million property, that's $5,000. Make sense? So you can discount your fees based on what the policy allows you to, but who's it ultimately costing?
Yeah, so
You're discounting the fee.
So the
That's
person
money,
on work.
yeah.
Jonathan, tell me about paragraph 6, please. I'm sorry.
Paragraph 6 talks about the commission, the fee that we get for performing our services.
Mhm.
So the standard fee here is 3%, and you just pay the difference between 3% and whatever the seller's agent is offering out. Meaning that before we go into a property, I can tell you on the MLS it says the agent that's selling the home or listing the home is offering out 2% or 2.5%, and you just pay the difference of that.
Okay, so is it possible that I could be paying the whole 3%?
Very, very rarely would that happen if it was a for sale.
But I don't want to pay 3%.
Yeah, so if we come across a property that you have a little bit of interest in, and I will always let you know this, for example, is a for sale by owner, they're not offering out any fee, we can try to negotiate one, but if not, you would be up for the whole 3%. And if you want to take that into account with your decision on whether or not you want to go see the property, totally up to you. So that's a very rare occurrence.
Okay, so I don't share that information with them before I schedule a showing. I schedule a showing, and then what I'll do is, because again, I don't want this to be an impediment. I also don't want this to be a surprise that they're going to owe some fee. I'll show them when we get to the property for the property I schedule, hey, not that it's all about the money, but I just want to share with you that if this property is of interest to you, they're offering 2.5, see right here. And if you decide to buy it, that means you're going to owe me an extra 0.5 point. So just keep that in mind as you're evaluating this property.
Okay. So you could tell them, in this age, you could tell them that they would know when they go to see the property. Right?
Yep.
But you're saying it's just scheduled.
Yeah, you're always going to know because I'm going to tell you,
Mhm.
you know, either at or before or during the showing.
Mhm.
You're always absolutely going to know before you make an offer because it's probably going to impact what you're going to offer.
Mhm.
And I'm going to try to offer strategies to offset that to some degree possible.
Mhm.
Whether it's negotiating additional things in, negotiating the price down, or negotiating some type of credit. Okay, remember, what's my job description? To help you find the property you want to buy and help you buy it with the least amount of money out of your pocket, including my fee. But I'm sure you can appreciate, I gotta get paid. Julie, your turn.
All right. So the next paragraph, paragraph 6, is about payment, which is always fun to talk about. So that's the commission, and for our company, the standard commission's 3%. For the most part, the seller's agent usually pays all, if not most of it. But I do want to let you know that if it's listed on MLS for, they're going to pay 2.5, there is, you could be on the hook for 0.5%. But at the same time, we'll work strategies to try to negotiate that down. So for the most part, hopefully you won't have to pay, but I just want you to be aware in case you do, that it's in
My
here.
attorney told me that I shouldn't have to pay. As a buyer, I never pay.
Well, I wouldn't say never. And your attorney is not totally correct. And for the most part, maybe 99% of the time, you don't pay. But there is, a few instances where you may have to pay, and I just want you to be aware of it.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't start giving percentages out because it varies. And
Okay.
if I look at Nicole, and who is, I would say that she signs up 99% of her people, and 98% of her people end up having to pay an extra 0.5% in some form. And remember, she's typically dealing in price ranges where it's unlikely you're getting a closing cost credit because you're in such competitive situations.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't say 99% of the time you won't have to. It's my job to try and make sure you're spending the least amount of money out of your pocket, including my fee. And again, as it relates to the attorney, great. I'm not sure what your attorney's experience is in this world. I can tell you that I work at a firm that they've been doing this for 20 years and do it all the time. And they do it all the time because that's the value that we bring. I'm going to make sure that you're so happy at the end of this that you want to go do it again.
And pay me more.
And pay me again. Okay.
Okay.
Mariah?
Great. So after you have better knowledge of all the things that I offer for you and
Yep.
bring to the table, the next paragraph is going to go over payment because I generally don't like to work for free. The payment for the standard payment is 3%.
3%. That
yeah.
sounds kind of high.
Well, with all the value and the high standards that our brokerage has, we charge the 3%, but the seller or the listing agent, generally in most circumstances will offer to pay that commission, or will offer 2% or a percentage of it. So you will most likely not have to pay the 3%, but in some cases, if there was a specific house and it was only 2.5%, you would be responsible for that 0.5% to come up with, just for my fee. But I'm going to do everything in my power to negotiate that on your behalf because I'd rather you not have to pay that.
Okay.
And get you the house for as little money out of your pocket and as well as my commission.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does. Madison?
So the next paragraph is talking about payment. Now this is about how you pay me. However, most of the time the seller will pay. So the seller or the seller's agent will be compensating me. So for my
I'm
services.
sorry. So you started off by saying I have to pay you, but then you said the seller's going to pay you. Is it the seller's paying you or am I paying you?
I think it's good. But, so should I start over?
You probably shouldn't say that.
That was candid.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Okay. Okay, so I'll start over.
Go for it.
Okay. So the next paragraph is talking about payment. So this is how I would get compensated. Now, most of the time, the seller or the seller's agent does compensate this fee, but every once in a while, we go see a property, we'll notice that the fee that they cover is 2.5%, and my standard fee is 3%. So in that certain scenario, you would be responsible for the 4.5%. So you can think about it as if we're out to a restaurant and they pay the bill, but you're paying the tip, sort of situation. However,
I like that analogy. It's okay.
however, I will do everything in my power to get you to pay the least amount possible.
So you accept tips, right? That's what you said.
And yeah, I will definitely negotiate, but you won't have try to make you pay the least amount possible.
How'd you do?
Good, I like your analogy.
Jessica, you're up.
Okay. In the next paragraph, we're going to talk about payment. We normally charge a standard rate of 3%, but often the seller will pay a portion or all of that when you're looking for your home. And we have a lot of value to buy a dream home, and I'll be with you every step of the way and search for your property.
You explained it adequately.
Did she say?
I'm having trouble with this one.
We'll blame it on the internet connection.
Okay. I don't know.
All right.
Go that the seller pay.
So you're breaking up, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I said I'll to negotiate. The seller usually does pay, and I'll have them try to pay the percentage.
Okay. I would prefer, just from an ethical perspective, that we don't say usually, because
Okay.
they don't usually pay. I mean, they usually pay a fee, but oftentimes,
Mhm.
more often than not, the buyers are going to be on the hook for something.
Yeah, I think I've only, of all the MLS I've been going through, I think I've only seen one, maybe that was 3%.
Right.
So I really don't think it's the majority of the time or most of the time or.
It's almost never, it's almost never.
So that's why I don't wanna misstate that.
Right. So you have to be careful about it, right? And part of what I want you to do is you're embracing this paragraph, and I appreciate that you're all starting to embrace it, because it's easier to do it now and fumble when I'm here and we can have some fun with it versus having somebody sitting at the end of the table, right? I remember the first time I did this and it did not go well. It just did not go well. We'll just leave it at that. I got chewed up and spit out and then stepped on and ground into the ground. So it's not a lot of fun if you don't know what you're talking about, because I went into it. It was a different world back then to begin with. And I hadn't seen this once before I went into my first consultation. I read it once before I went into my first consultation, and that was my first mistake, which is why I spend so much time on these documents and you being able to be fluent with them, because I never want you all to have the experience that I had. Okay, I had hair back then. I lost it all because of it. Okay, that's what's going to happen to you if you do this wrong. You're going to lose all your hair. I'll just.
I have a question.
Yep.
So my uncle is like a financial advisor,
Awesome.
and when you start talking money,
Yeah.
very cut and dry, this, that, and the other. And I know, like, in our situation right here, we're like, oh, because we provide value, things like that. What are like some key, like
We have a list of all the advantages of working with us.
bullet points of value that we can like kind of hold them with? You know what I mean? So I'm sure that I know one of us, and definitely me, are probably gonna,
Maybe we're gonna write it on the board.
Okay. If you want.
we're definitely going to find people or work with people that are more money savvy or financial conscious, or however you want to put it, or just very cut and dry with things
Yeah,
like that.
and they're
So I
typically
just
going to
wanna-
be the accountants and the engineers.
Exactly,
Yep.
like he's works for Fidelity, he knows everything about money there is, so it's just like,
Great. So then if you know that going into it, if you know that going into it, then you ought to be able to respond with what I call the objection busters, right?
yeah,
And the fact is and then I'll go into it. So if you and I are role playing and you're the accountant, so we're having this discussion and I say to you something to the effect, okay, so let's turn over the page, but we've gone over all this stuff. But wait, there's more. Let's go to page 2.
yeah,
The back of the page, my favorite paragraph is the payment paragraph. Why? Because it tells you how I get paid. The great news is that there's the possibility that you won't owe me the entire fee. The entire fee might either be offset by the seller or at least partially paid by the seller. Wouldn't that be great if you could get my full services for a partial payment? Okay?
so what services are those compared to the services that are offered by the real estate agent I talked to before, that was 2%, like what value?
Right, so let me ask you the question. What services was that agent going to provide you?
Fiduciary,
Okay?
and,
Fiduciary isn't a service, it's a requirement under
Requirement.
that law. under law if you enter into a contract with that agent. So I don't necessarily say that that's, you know, the fiduciary isn't what I'm bringing part of the value, but what was their value? Why did they only charge you 2% when I'm gonna charge you 3%?
I'm not sure, they just said that theirs was 2%, why is yours 3%? What is the difference that you do compared to that person?
When I think about the market knowledge and negotiating skill alone, I'm gonna make you more, I'm gonna net you more money or more money, have you keep more money in your pocket as a buyer because I'm gonna be negotiating better and we're gonna have the right strategies to approach it. Don't you want somebody that knows what they're doing? And aren't you willing to pay for somebody that knows what they're doing?
Yes, but what makes you think that you have more market value or knowledge over the other person? Just
No,
because your fee is higher?
Not because my fee is higher, it's because I have a higher when I look at my list to sell ratio and when I look at my, did you do what I had asked before you came here, which was to go out on Zillow and look at all the reviews that I have? Do you think those people are happy because I did nothing all day? Right? The other thing is, Mariah, I want you to understand, what do you do for a living?
Me?
Yeah.
Are you asking me
No,
script
No,
wise?
Fidelity or.
Oh.
yeah.
I'm a VP of financial consultant. at
Awesome, so
Fidelity.
you, of all people, understand the value of a dollar.
Yes, I love money.
Awesome, great. Now,
I don't like to spend it if I
Okay.
don't have to.
so how do you get paid? Are you on salary? Do you get bonus? Do you get,
Salary bonuses.
okay, so on your salary and bonuses, so at the end of every week, you get paid every week?
Yes.
Okay, so you get a set salary, guess what? I don't,
Mhm.
right? So I have to make sure that my fee is set up front, and I have to give you all of my service, my time, my energy, my market knowledge, my negotiating skill. You get all of that all the way through the process, yet I'm not making a bloody penny.
Yeah.
I don't make it until the very end. So that's why part of the reason why I charge the fees that I do, because when you lend somebody money, does your company make money on that?
With interest.
With interest, right? So I'm not, should I start checking on interest? Maybe I should start charging 4% now that I think about it.
Yeah.
Because you're essentially using my services and my time and my market knowledge is up front. I'm willing to do that, but that's why my fees are 3%. Have you been to my office? I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to invite you in with this whole COVID thing, but you need to come to my office and see and meet my team.
Yeah.
Right? I have a full-time staff of support people. The agent that was charging you 2%, they're it. They're the only person you're gonna get.
Okay.
You have a full-time support staff, don't you?
Yes, I have.
If you did it all yourself, wouldn't you be worth a lot more?
Yes.
Right? So tell me about what you do specifically. Are you an accountant? Are you a mutual fund manager? Tell me what you do at Fidelity.
I consult people's finances
You consult people's finances. So,
and invest for them.
okay, so how does the company make money? There's generally commission charged with
Sure.
trades and things like that.
Commission for my services, when I make the money, this, that, and
So let me ask you a question. Are your commissions negotiable?
No.
Okay, so why should mine be negotiable? Okay.
Can you-
Said yeah for fun.
Yeah,
Right.
that's something that my uncle would say.
Right, but do you see what I'm saying is you can often deflect a lot of these conversations by relating back to what they do or relating back to something that they know.
Talk about them.
And it's not so much that you're talking about them, but you can relate back to, hey, you don't negotiate your commissions on your trades. Why should I be negotiating my commission on helping you find a house?
And some people are gonna know where you're going
Oh, yeah.
with it, and they're gonna purposely say they're gonna purposely lie. Like they would have said yes if they negotiate, like just things
Yeah.
to try to throw you off.
Okay, so you
So
negotiate.
if you, could you word it this way, be like, just because one client, I may have one client that uses less of my time, stuff like that, you may take up a lot more, does that mean I'm going to add on more interest to my fee, things like that, or you don't?
No, but I try not to make it that specific. I try to keep it as generic as possible. I either try to relate it to what they're doing, or I try to relate it to something that might be somewhat similar, if you will. Sometimes people say, I'm not willing to sign this. I'm not willing to be obligated to a fee. All right, well, when you go to the doctor, do you pay the doctor?
Yeah.
Of course you do. Well, no, I don't. My health insurance pays it. Well, aren't you paying a health insurance premium? And don't you pay a copay when you get there? And aren't there certain things that are outside the bounds of that? You just have to be comfortable enough to be able to make the analogies. And at some point, knowing your audience,
Yeah.
you can make that analogy.
Could you all be like, well, we're kind of like a one-stop brokerage where you
Absolutely.
can get your,
Mhm.
your marketing and your staging and photos for that, and then you can
Yeah.
also get pre-approved and things like that, so you can.
Well, here's the
offer-
great news, right? You hire me as your buyer's agent. Here's the value that we're gonna bring. Besides the transaction management stuff that's gonna happen from the time you sign the offer and get all the way through, and the support that Pam's gonna give you and I'm gonna give you, and, working with the other people that we recommend. Let's remember one thing. Once we find you the house, we have to negotiate the house.
Mhm.
There's a collective experience of 100+ years of negotiating experience in my office. What's that worth to you? Right?
Yeah.
So sometimes, and especially all of you starting off new in this business, you're not going to be able to, because you're going to get asked, how long have you been in the business? And your answer better be, feels like forever. But you have to, you go from my experiences to our experience is, and you go from specific to general, from general back to specific. It's also a technique of how to deal with objections, right? You're $5,000 or $10,000 apart on a transaction. That's a lot of money. But if you take that $10,000 and spread it over 30 years, it's what, $2 a day? Can you give up a cup of coffee a day? So you have to get comfortable with being able to find these realistic analogies that either take the specific and make it more general, or take the general and make it more specific, because it helps your argument.
Do you ever get someone like, because when I first came in here, I did ask Nicole that question, how she started and what she said, and she said the same thing, it feels like forever.
Mhm.
Do you
Go
ever,
figure.
do you ever get someone that's like, then why don't you have any Zillow reviews or anything like that?
We have tons of them. Have you looked at our team? We work
So,
as a
like, you
team.
specifically, oh, that's what you said?
We work as a team,
Okay,
right? Go look at our team reviews. I think we got 170 whatever.
and then what if you
270.
ask them,
272.
so say they're like, oh, okay, that makes sense, blah, 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 and then you ask them at the end if they'll write you a Zillow review.
Yep.
Then the next person that you see will only see that you have one Zillow review.
Great. Have you seen that our team, because we operate as a team, we have 270 Zillow
And
reviews?
you kind of just go like that until you build more.
Right,
Zillow
because I'm going from what? You're being asked about the specific,
You could say.
and I don't have a great answer for the
Zillow.
specific because I don't have any transactions yet. It's my first one. So you revert to the general. Well, look at our team. Look at how many Zillow reviews we get. When you hire me, you're getting everybody. Remember? That's what we talked about in this thing called the Massachusetts Mandatory Real Estate Licensing Consumer Relationship Disclosure Form, in which I owe you a fiduciary, and it designates us, we are a non-designated office, which means you hire Julie, you get Eric, and when you get Eric, you get Madison, when you get Madison, you get Luciano. We operate as a team. We truly do. Everybody's gonna tell you that, but nobody does it at the level that we do it, both from a customer service perspective. Why? Because Lillian's goal in all of this was to develop a real estate company that will provide she wanted it to be the Four Seasons experience. So much so, she went and hired a manager from the Four Seasons to help her run the company.
That makes a lot of sense.
I have to add you to our value sheet.
I
There
was
you
gonna say, that's a good little selling point.
Okay, but remember one thing, and it will be very difficult for you the first time you have to do it. Every interaction that you have with a prospect, whether it's a buyer or a seller, you have to make that on the spot. As much as we're trying to teach you from a sales perspective is to listen to what they're saying and then build off of what they're saying or respond to what they're saying with questions and to get them to where you want to go, right? As long as you're asking questions, you're in control. There is going to be a percentage of people that you are not going to convince. And the hardest thing, I promise you right now, the hardest thing you'll ever do is get up and walk away from the table. Okay, but that is one of your options. And I'll tell you, the first time I did it was sitting at this table in the old office. I was sitting where Madison was. The husband was sitting here and the wife was sitting here, and they came in and I was doing my CMA2, where I came in and talked to them about the whole, here's what your house is worth and so on and so forth. I had already been to their house, walked through it. They had come to me to a very through a mutual friend, so it wasn't cold. I came highly recommended, and he was an engineer, and I was ready for it.
They're facts.
Oh,
Like that are just like
we went through the
so
CMA, and
facts.
he thought his house was here, I thought his house was here, and without beating him up, we got him to what we thought the value was, but then it came down to, okay, so Eric, just before we go any further, right, what's your fee? Okay, and I said, listen, because you came to me from a trusted, reliable source and a known source, I'm only gonna charge you 5%. 5%, really? That's what you're gonna charge me? Yes, sir, sir am. Why is that? And I went through all the reasons about how the team and all this service and all this, and look at the office and so on and so forth. And I said, well, are you gonna discount it? No. Why should I discount it? Because I've talked to 2 other agents that will do it for 4%, and I don't see why I should have to pay 5% for you. Just because you have a nice office. I don't want to pay for your flooring and everything else that you paid a lot of money for. All right, well, it's not just the flooring, it's the experience. And I kept going and I kept going. And I could see that I was getting nowhere. So I looked and I said, you know what? I understand what your concern is. I'm not willing to discount my fees, so I think the conversation's over. The wife almost had a heart attack. He was like, haha, you're kidding, right? I said, no. I said, let me tell you one thing about how I work. Okay, 1, I don't discount my fees. 2, I gotta like the people that I'm working with, and I kind of like you folks, but I also know that I can help them, and I gotta know that they're gonna appreciate it, and I don't think you're gonna appreciate what I'm gonna do for you if I don't discount my fee, so I don't think I'm the broker for you.
It also shows that you know your value and.
Bingo, and I will tell you, they left, she was blown away, she was like hitting on him saying, what the hell are you doing, blah, 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 blah.
Literally recommended that.
Says-
Right.
Well, and it's
But
like
my
you don't
question,
have
didn't
to.
you already discount your fee? Because you're normally 6% and then you said 5. Didn't you tell
That's
them,
like
oh, I
just
already
what-
did discount
Yeah,
for you?
right. But the bottom line is they left and I was shaking like a leaf because I just let
Probably didn't
somebody
matter.
walk away, right? Who of us can allow, $10,000 or $15,000 or $20,000 worth of gross commission income walking out the door? It was the hardest thing I ever did, but I learned a lot from it, right? I learned from it that I know what my worth is, and I'm okay if that person doesn't want to hire me. Just like this conversation with this guy the other day who's looking for the agent that charges the least amount of fee. I know that if I bring that guy on, I am going to just get my head handed to me every single day because there's nothing that I'm going to do that's going to make him happy because I never discounted my fee. And he's going to be all over me. And for me, it becomes the business decision to walk away from it now or deal with that headache, right? And sometimes I'm going to deal with the headache. Sometimes I'm not.
Now, would you recommend for us, since it's a bit of a different scenario as when you're just starting off, would you recommend saying okay?
No, because if you need my approval or Lillian's approval to discount anything less than the 2.5.
2.5.
Right.
But if they say negotiate to 2.5, ultimately that would be your decision to say
That's
okay?
your decision. It's your decision. You don't need me sitting on your shoulder or telling you you can go to 2.5%. You can go to 2.5%. We're going to give you that discretion.
But just definitely it would be better to reiterate.
They always teach that in the beginning when you're new, to try to never ever resort
To
to that, 5 or to the 2.5, just because you're developing the habit. And if you're thinking to yourself like, oh, you know what, like I'm just
I'll
gonna
just do it this time.
And it's like to avoid the harder conversation with the customers, then you're just gonna get out of it.
And it's a half a person, I don't know, people like, they don't, even if it's the 5%, it probably didn't matter if it was 5 or 6%. It probably was just like he wanted.
He wanted what he wanted.
He wanted what he wanted to,
cheapest and-
and that's fine.
I think it's a car dealership where you walk in and we're over here
Yeah.
saying fake numbers. You can even say we're not like a car dealership. I'm not gonna play with you for a half hour. I'm just gonna tell you the actual number.
Right? But the goal is, remember,
And it's showing that you have confidence and
No, I definitely,
Like,
I
your time,
wouldn't say
you're not
like
desperate for
3,
it,
I wouldn't just like
even though we are.
be like, okay, fine with 2.5%, because obviously I would want the 3 or
Eric-
just like the
Eric.
3. My question was just, do people do that? Do people say, okay, 2.5%? That was my question.
you have the discretion to do that if you want. Yes, Julie, sorry.
Do you ever have like, so where you have like some people that are friends, and like say it was a trusted friend and you sold, you know, a bunch of things for this client and you discounted them from whether it's listing or buying the 6 to the 5 or the 3 to the 2.5, then they tell a friend, you know, Eric's the best. He does blah, 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 blah. Do you just take the 3? And if they're like, well, my friends told me it was only 2.5%.
That's up to
Have
you.
you gotten that a lot?
It's a business decision. I generally, if it's you know, I am aware of what I'm charging people, and if they're referring me business, I generally don't. I'll keep it at the same, just because it's not worth the headache and it's not worth,
Right.
you know, because there are going to be referral sources. I was on a showing right before this. I listed and sold their house in Reading, helped them buy a house in Andover, and over the last 8 years, I've gotten 13 sides from them. Right? You're going to have those people that know everybody and are going to refer business to you. And is it worth me trying to squeeze an extra 0.5% out of the people that they're referring to me to piss off my referral source so that I never get another piece of business? No, it's not. But on the flip side, I also want you to recognize that over the course of the last 20 years, Lillian has represented a couple dozen builders, probably 40 or 50 different builders, who give us massive amounts of business. Not one of them was ever discounted less than 5. And these guys are giving us subdivisions of, at that time, they were giving us subdivisions of 10, 20, and 30 homes. They were all getting charged 5%. Okay, it wasn't a volume. We don't give out volume discount because your work doesn't change.
Right.
And that's part of what the discussion today is. You know, do I like spending so much time on the payment paragraph? No, but I need you to be comfortable and understand it. And can you come and ask for a discount below 2.5 or below 5 on the listing? You sure can. But you better have your ducks in a row, and you better be able to justify it through a smart business discussion, right? Because if you can give me a good business reason for the discount, and there are some, then fine, we'll do that. We'll authorize the discount, we'll sign off on it. But don't keep asking me, right? These are the exceptions, not the rules.
Mm-hmm.
We have to get it signed if we bring it down to 2.5 or anything below that?
Anything below that. Okay, so you don't need me to be sitting in the conference room or stop what you're doing if you're going from 3 to 2.5.
And if you do go from 3 to 2.5, is there a different thing that they would sign, because this says 3?
No, you cross that out, write 2.5 and initial, and you got to do it twice because it's in that paragraph twice. Okay? It's your money, it's your livelihood.
Obviously, I don't want to do that. I was just asking the question.
I understand. Okay, but again, if you look at over the course of time, if you take, so just let's take Nicole. Nicole will probably end up at least $15 million worth of production. Here's what those numbers look like. Okay, if you do $15 million in production your first or second year, no pressure. Times 0.03. That could, if you did $15 million in production, your gross commission income at 3% would be $450,000. Okay, $450,000. What would you do with $450,000? But even if you discount it by 0.5%, if you drop down to $375,000, what would you do with an extra $75,000 in your pocket?
Is that $450,000 that isn't split up between
That's the gross amount.
that she
What is
takes
the
home,
gross
or
amount?
the amount that?
The gross amount is the amount that you're generating, and then off of that comes your split.
Okay.
So there's
But-
still a split in
So
that.
there
Yes.
is still a split.
Yeah, so even at that, even if you're at the beginning split of 50-50, you're still leaving $37,500 out of your pocket. What would you do with $37,500? What would you do?
A lot.
Luch, what would you do?
How much is it?
$37,000. What would you do with $37,000?
Invest it.
Okay, so great, you'd invest it. That means you gotta actually charge it and get it to be able to invest it. Okay, so Miss Mutual Fund Manager, if you take $37,000, let's call it $10,000 a year for 20 years, That's an extra $200,000 over the course of 20 years. What could you grow that money into over the course of 40 years if you invest it? You could probably double it at least once, I would think, right?
Brother handles that for me. He does wealth management too.
That's fine.
I go for it. But yeah, I did investors save for a house.
You know, if you're investing properly at, what is it, 7 or 8%, you can double your money every 7 or 8 years.
Correct.
So if you have $200,000 in the first 20 years, and then over the course of the next 20 years, you can triple it by investing it properly. Do you see that by the end of your career, discounting that original $30,000 each year or $10,000 each year for 20 years is costing you $1 million?
So I just want to clarify because sometimes I get a little confused.
That's okay.
Okay, so the 3% of the 100,000 or whatever example that you gave before, that was $500, right? Yeah.
No, that was a 0.5%.
So the example that you gave with Nicole, where it was 450,000 in gross commission.
Yep.
So gross commission is when it's before the split.
So the gross commission is determined by the price of the house, purchase price, times whatever the percentage is. Okay, pick a percentage.
Right.
3%. Okay. And the way that it works, for those of you that have signed, you've seen the anatomy of the commission. You haven't signed your paperwork because you don't have your license yet, but you'll sign a document that says anatomy of the commission, and it speaks about what is gross commission income and how you get to the net commission income.
Oh, next
So
time.
this is before the split with the broker. Whenever you hear gross commission income, which is how we will always refer to it,
GCI, right?
GCI, gross commission income, it's basically the purchase price times whatever the percentage for the commission is.
Okay.
Okay. Right.
And then the step from there to get the net commission is 50/50.
We'll give you the anatomy of the commission. You can read it all through and have some fun. I just don't want to get sidetracked. If that's okay. Okay. Questions on paragraph 6. Do you understand the importance of knowing your stuff? Because this is where you're going to either hang yourself up or you're going to get hung up on.
So
So you-
Eric,
Yeah.
sorry. The only thing that none of us said was the first question when I had asked you about like when the contract terminates. Should we even bring that up or just kind of, I hate to say glaze over it because they have to read it anyway, but is it something that we should touch upon or do you just kind of?
You can reference it. Again, I'm not a big fan of glazing things over. I'm less of a fan of just not mentioning things because then that's when you typically will get in trouble. But when I'm giving my 10-minute overview of this document, I'm not getting, like for paragraph 3, the buyer's obligations, I'm not getting into the whole thing about sex offenders and this and that and, you know, items A through H. I'd be there for an hour trying to explain that to people.
Right.
My job is to tell them, here's what that says in synopsis. Your job to read it in detail. If you have questions about what it's in detail, I'm happy to answer them for you. I'm not trying to glaze over it, but I am just trying to give you a sense for what it is so that you get comfortable with it, right? Because you, Miss Buyer, and me as the agent, we have responsibilities to each other and to ourselves. Okay. Any questions on the payment paragraph? Okay. So the next paragraph is the broker's role, right? And so there's 2 aspects of this. We as brokers are required under common practice, the code of ethics, and even licensing law, not necessarily licensing law, but law, to identify with the consumer what our role in that transaction is. That comes right back to the what? The Massachusetts Mandatory Real Estate Licensee Consumer Relationship Disclosure Form, right? Because you're having that discussion with them when? At the first personal meeting, no later than the first personal meeting to discuss a specific property. So back in the day, the way that I was taught it, I doubt they teach it this way anymore, is the consumer you're working with, when you cross the threshold of that door into that house, better know who you're working for. If they don't, you've not done your job. Okay? When I started, it was easy because I automatically defaulted to representing the seller. That's not the case. You have that declaration, that decision has to be made before you cross the threshold. And generally, when you're calling an agent to say, I want to show your listing, you have to declare, am I a buyer's agent? Am I a facilitator?
And you give the name of your buyer.
I never give the name of my buyer.
So you just have to identify that you are representing the buyer, but you
Right,
give them
so
that information.
A lot of the scheduling now goes through the third-party scheduling service called Showing Time. There's when you're setting up the showing, it's gonna ask you, what's your role? Are you representing the buyer? Are you a facilitator? On our listings, it'll even ask you if you're representing the seller. Because isn't it possible for us to show a consumer the property that is being represented by this office when they've not chosen us to be their buyer agent? What do you default as? Spot quiz. On our listing, you're gonna show, somebody picks up a phone, calls you on your new listing, you tell them to meet you at the house, you've never met them before, you're about to cross in, you gotta have the conversation about the Massachusetts Mandatory Real Estate Licensee Consumer Relationship Disclosure Form. They are a customer, but who are you representing?
The seller.
So,
And they need to know that before they cross the threshold into the house. Why? Besides the fact that it's law, why?
Good, it's good.
So they know where your interest lies.
You don't want them to start revealing all this, I mean, you do, but that wouldn't be ethical.
Right, so you are violating ethical and your licensing law if you don't, number one, because the consumer, in the eyes of the state, the consumer needs to know who they're dealing with and therefore what they can and can't say. And most consumers are not familiar with the word agency, which is what? Means what?
Representation, legal representation.
Agency means what?
Legal and legal.
Agency means what?
Transaction.
Management of a transaction, typically a financial transaction. Okay. All right, the second part of the broker's role is something that we've already taught you, but it's a reiteration. I'm not an attorney. I'm not a tax person. I'm not a zoning specialist. I'm not a home inspector. I'm not any of those things. And if you need those things, we'll help you get them. If I give you some insight from one of those professions that has nothing to do with me pretending to be that profession, it's just based on my experience and it's my opinion as a broker, not as a attorney. Okay? I'm notorious for reviewing contracts for my clients, not because I'm trying to give them legal advice, but I want to make sure that before they sign anything, when you're a list agent and you get an offer, you have to have read that offer in full. I don't care how many times you think you've seen the form. There are different versions of that form, and some offices don't update the versions that they have, and some offices have their own, like us. We have all custom forms. Our form is totally custom. We don't use the standard forms that are out there. They're based on the standard forms. But that's why we want you, even though you're going to be out prospecting for a lot of sellers, first off, through Vulcan, the vast majority of your business starting off is likely to be with buyers, which is okay because it's going to teach you about mortgage contingencies and home inspection contingencies, and you're going to see it so that when you start working with sellers, you can actually explain what those things are from experience. Okay, but you're not an attorney, don't give legal advice. Paragraph 8, the first paragraph 8, not the second. Paragraph 8 is the agency information. Paragraph A, we're reiterating what? That we are a non-designated agency, which means what, Jonathan?
That we all have the same relationship with the client.
Okay, give it to me in layman's terms, Mariah.
That when you hire us, you get all of this in the office.
Okay, and now we get to this thing called consent. Who would like to read aloud that paragraph for us? Luch, you're up.
The buyer understands that broker also represents sellers and that if broker shows buyer property listed by a seller, client.
Mhm.
A dual agency will be created. The broker may act as a dual agent who represents both prospective buyer and seller with their informed written consent. A dual agent is authorized to assist the buyer and seller in a transaction, but shall be neutral with regard to any conflicting interests of the buyer and seller. Consequently, a dual agent will not have the ability to satisfy fully the duties of loyalty, full disclosure, reasonable care, and obedience to lawful instructions, but shall still owe the duty of confidentiality of material information and the duty to account for funds. Buyer understands that material information received from either client that is confidential may not be disclosed by a dual agent, except if the disclosure is expressly authorized, if such disclosure is required by law, if such disclosure is intended to prevent illegal conduct, or if such disclosure is necessary to prosecute a claim against a person represented or to defend a claim against the broker or salesperson. This duty of confidentiality shall continue after termination of the brokerage relationship. By signing this agreement, buyer authorizes broker to act as a dual agent and consents to dual agency. If dual agency occurs in a transaction, a notice of dual agency will be given prior to signing an offer to purchase real estate.
That'll make your head spin, huh? What do you think that'll do to a consumer when you try to explain that?
Hopefully nothing if you're good.
An excellent point. So one point before we dive into it is the sentence that the duty of confidentiality shall, there's that word, continue after termination of the brokerage relationship. What does that mean, Jessica?
Shall means that it will. So if you have that, I don't want to say agreement with them, but you have that look after the transaction's complete. Like with confidentiality and things like that, it continues on.
So when does it end?
I want to say never, but if it's, the person, you have to have the, everything
Well, it
confidential.
does end, but you'll have no way of telling it because you'll be dead. It ends when you die.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
But you'll have no way of telling anybody unless you're up there or down there, depending on your beliefs. So
Right.
the reality is it never ends. So in theory, what does that mean? That means that when somebody tells you something in confidence, that as it relates to their motivation, timing, and value, I'm getting a divorce, whatever it is, whatever that is, that cannot be public knowledge ever. Okay? So you don't want to be at the cocktail party having a glass of wine and telling somebody about the wild stories of real estate and go, oh yeah, my client who was getting divorced and blah, blah, blah. You just broke your confidentiality and you're now going to be liable if that ever gets back to them.
Got it. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it goes to the grave with you, as they like to say. Now that's not necessarily the biggest point in consent for dual agency that I want you to walk away with, but it's a point we haven't had that discussion on yet. Okay, now let me ask the question, Julie. I'm going to ask you the question. Why is it that when you're sitting in our meetings, and I'm looking at all of you, but Julie's going to answer the question, that even though transactions have occurred or transactions are in process, that we, Lillian, myself, others, will talk about things that are confidential in our group meeting, besides using it as a learning opportunity? What allows us to do that?
We're in a non-designated agency.
Bingo. Okay, and that is the key difference. If you wanna have a good laugh one day, go sit with Joanna Webster and ask her about the meetings that they have at Coldwell Banker, because they're nothing like the meetings that we have here. Because they can't do what we do.
Wouldn't she be not allowed to share because they're in a designated agency?
Share what?
Her experience with their meetings and what they talked about and stuff. Isn't it confidential? Isn't it the opposite of us?
She can, but
Neither of them are talking about their clients.
right. So
Oh.
the point is that we spend a lot of time, as you've gotten to notice, about talking specific situations and talking about what's happened with this situation or that situation. they can't really, in many times, other companies, most other companies can't do that in a group setting because they'd be in violation of their fiduciary responsibility to the individual clients by doing that. Whereas we are not, because my buyer is your buyer, your seller is my seller, and we have the same fiduciary responsibilities to those people. So it doesn't matter what I say to you, right? Think about this, and this is where you can start explaining the differences and why non-designated agency, in my humble opinion, is a competitive advantage, is because when you have a question, you can go ask somebody for help. Okay? Think about the reality of being in a designated office. Jonathan, you and Joel sit in the same office and you're sharing, and can you hear him when he's on the phone? And what happens when his listing calls him and says, Joel, I hate to tell you this, but we'll take whatever you want because my wife and I are getting a divorce, or we've got to be in California. And he goes, oh my God, you're moving to California, you got to be there when? And you overhear that, and you're working in a designated office, and you have a buyer that wants to go see that house. Don't you have an obligation to now tell them that information?
Interesting question on that exact situation.
Okay.
If that exact situation happened actually in here where we're non-designated, because we have confidentiality to both, even that information was learned accidentally, but we're there, a client of ours as well, I wouldn't go tell.
You
my
can't.
buyer, right?
You can't.
But if I
Because
heard,
what does it say right in the middle of this?
that would be
The duty of confidentiality remains.
Yeah.
Period.
So that's an interesting example of where they didn't get a notice of dual agency, but there was like a slip up and we have to.
Well, no, the notice of dual agency comes into the effect when it's the buyer, our buyer buying one of our listings, and the notice of dual agency comes in at the time of no later than offer, attached to the offer at, again, the latest point, saying, hey, buyer understands that they're buying a listing from this office, and because they're doing that, they need to know that we also represent the seller. Okay, so the best way to describe dual agency or this consent is hey, remember how you're learning about dual agency. There's three components. There's disclosure, there's consent, and there's notification. So what is consent, Mr. Consumer and Ms. Consumer? Consent to dual agents is simply this. You're acknowledging the possibility that it might happen and consenting to the fact that it might happen in advance. Didn't this paragraph just say, we've already talked to you about what dual agency is. If you have any questions, let me know, and I'm happy to explain it again. By signing this, you're giving me your consent. And it's also saying that if you, by giving us consent, we're obligated under the law to provide you notice of when it's happening. Okay, that notice comes in the form of writing. It'll be at least attached to the offer. I'm going to tell you as a matter of good practice, whenever, if you're working with the buyer or working with the seller, and it's your buyer going into one of our listings, you better look at your buyer and say, this is one of those dual agency situations. Whether you make the offer or not, I just want you to be aware of it. And what am I going to do if I'm the seller? Hey, Mr. Seller, Madison's showing one of our buyers that's a dual agency situation. If that buyer likes it, you're going to see this thing called notice of dual agency. Is anybody going to yell at you for over communicating? Not at all. In fact, I bet they'll appreciate it. Go ahead.
I was doing like a role play with my dad, and he said that in dual agency, he asked if it was my listing and he signed with me, would I represent the listing agent and he would have another contact in this office?
Depends on how you as the agent want to handle it.
Oh, okay.
But one of them would need to be move over and up, as we've talked about. If you
Yeah.
have to go to an agent of more experience, I'm going to tell you my preference is either Lillian or I.
Yeah.
First and foremost, if we're not available, and then sure, go get the Tylers or, or the Waynes. But my preference is either Lillian or I, only because we have the greatest amount of experience with disclosed dual agency, and we're going to be able to help you manage that process effectively. Okay, but yes, the answer is that, are we required to do that? No. as a matter of company policy, we have this over and up policy because we want both clients to be able to have free, unencumbered conversations with their agent about the strategy for the offer and so on and so forth, without the appearance or the potential for any of that conversation to be shared with the other client. And you're gonna have a greater chance of that happening if it's Eric's buyer buying Eric's listing, right? Don't you think there's a greater possibility that the buyer says something to me and that as I'm talking to the seller, it either slips out or it's, you know, I'm implying something? Don't you think it's better and gives the appearance of being at arm's length if the buyer's talking with Jonathan, my buyer's talking with Jonathan because I bumped him over there, and my seller's talking with me, and we can individually have conversations without it going through Eric's, and both coming through Eric's ears?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely makes a lot more sense, but so to answer, you said that it's up to you if you want to represent your.
Yeah, I would say that it's a conversation. One, both parties need to know.
Yeah.
Right? And one party is going to be pushed off. You, depending on how you present that, that's going to be a positive thing or a negative thing. Better be a positive thing, right?
Pass off the buyers. Buyers will work. You're welcome, Harry.
I like the
It's
way,
not, it's for the purposes of negotiation. It's not because you pass the buyer off to me, and that means that I'm going to go sit there at the open house with them and do, not the open house, the home inspection with them and stuff. It's for the purposes of negotiation.
but the way you worded it last time was really good, because you
Yeah,
said,
you know more about the sellers.
yeah, and you know everything about the property, and if you explain it that way, it makes sense.
I mean, it depends on the buyer too. You could show the person 30 houses and you know everything about them, but
Sure.
it could be the first one, the second house or whatever.
Okay. Paragraph C, accept the declaration. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, just with the dual agency. So if that does happen, it goes over and up like Madison had said. So then say you get the list, you get the buyer and Madison still has the listing. So if
Yep.
Madison had a question, because would she go to Lillian and not go to you, just so that there was no, okay. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Like so that you're not confused, like you said, if you like slip up because we can all talk
Yeah, if
freely.
Madison has a question about process, it's one thing. If Madison has a question about strategy or something that involves or impacts the fiduciary that she has to that individual client, you know, talking about motivation, timing, and value, then yeah, I'd say go talk to Lillian just to make sure. I would prefer to be there as a bright a line as possible to, you know, if we were ever get in court because somebody's accusing us of undisclosed dual agency, I want to be able to say, no, here's how we limited the opportunity for any appearance or possible impropriety because I took my buyer and I asked Lily to handle it for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I handled the seller,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think that is going, and I don't want to be the test case either, but in my mind, having worked this through and talked this through with attorneys, that was really the best way. You know, when we were seeing before the agency laws changed, you know, we were doing a lot of dual agency, but there was a lot of, you know, case law out there or suits in the book, particularly Coldwell Banker, no offense to Coldwell Banker, but there was a lot of dual agency issues. So we actually engaged one of the attorneys one of our E&O attorneys, and actually Lillian and I sat with him and we had these conversations. How do we want to do dual agency, we're comfortable doing dual agency, but what are the types of things that you've seen in the courtroom that we can avoid, that are, you know, that are things that if we avoid them, we'll avoid tripping ourselves up. And he said, listen, if you can separate, because, you know, you're representing both, even if it's one agent within your office that is physically working with both, have them separate that because it's a stronger appearance that you're practicing dual agency effectively.
Mm-hmm.
There's no requirement in law to do that. I have the right, you guys have the right to represent both parties in a transaction, and the law would say you're okay. And as long as you can prove that you did it, but isn't it going to be harder to prove that you didn't take the conversation that went in your right ear and have it with somebody in your left ear? It's going to be harder to say, did that influence your decisions, you as the agent? Did it cause you to sway one party more than the other, which would be a violation of dual agency? So we just said, If you're doing it, if it's your buyer and your seller, separate and give one away to somebody else. And give it to somebody that has greater level experience than you, so that they feel
More confident.
more confident, right? It's a psychological aspect. Nobody wants to get passed off, right? I don't want my buyers to get passed off to somebody, but if I've got to pass them off and I've got to have that potentially difficult situation because they want to buy a house that is also one of my listings, here's why I'm doing this, but I want to make sure that you're armed to the teeth and you're going to get the best representation possible. So in my case, I can only give it to Lillian, right? Because she's the only one over and up above me, or Bob.
Mhm.
So we found a way to still do dual agency, but not
Again, we can do it. The law says we can do it.
legally. We
I'm doing it,
are.
remember, I'm chief liability officer. I don't
It
want,
just takes out all of.
I just don't want to be in front of a court. And if I do, I want to have everything so stacked in our favor that the court just goes, why are we here?
Smart.
I have one more question on
Go
the
for it.
same topic.
Yeah.
So the situation that we were talking about before where we were deciding, say I stay with the listing and then I over and up you my buyer.
Okay.
Then would there be an agreement between us on how the commission works?
There's no change in commission. I'm not, if you over and up somebody, I'm not taking a commission. And neither is Lily.
Oh, really?
No,
Thank you.
that's not what we do. We're
We
here to
also
help
want to
you.
get on the commission.
I'll always take free money, but here's the general, here's how we operate. So just some basic premises that we operate under that you all need to know about. One, no negativity. That doesn't mean you don't have a bad day. We all have bad days. I probably have more than most, so I apologize. But we're not ever going to tolerate somebody just walking around and being a curmudgeon, and that's all they do all day is complain, complain, complain. They do that for more than a couple of days, and I've had a conversation with them. You will not see them here anymore because we just don't want the negativity. Okay, not a threat. That's just how we choose to operate. The other thing that we want to make sure that we do is that we're here supporting you, right? I'm here to answer your questions. That's why I was hired, was to make sure that you get trained and that you have the support that you need. Sometimes I'm going to pass you off to somebody else because I'm either in the middle of something or somebody else might have the better answer. Okay, but we're the resources for you. I fully expect that each one of you at some point in your careers are going to take a vacation. And you should probably take a vacation at least once a year. When you go on vacation, here's the requirement. You need to take any buyers you're working with and assign them to another agent. Okay? I don't have a problem helping to watch listings because they're a little bit less work. It's more difficult for me to do that. But my preference, and maybe now that we have as many agents as we have, when you go on vacation, get somebody to cover for you. You want to make some financial arrangements with them, you go ahead. I'm going to tell you, when you go on vacation, I'll cover for you. When I go on vacation, you cover for me. That's the payment, in my humble opinion. I'll give you an example. I go on vacation, I generally go to Tyler and say, hey, Tyler, because Lillian's too busy, can you watch these folks for me? I've had vacation where Tyler's written and negotiated 2 or 3 or 4 offers for me, done home inspections, and done all kinds of things. But guess what? I've done the same for him. And I don't ever expect that when I do it for him that Tyler's going to pay me, and Tyler doesn't expect me that when he does it for me, I'm going to pay him. Can we make that arrangement? Is that allowed? Sure, if you want to do that. But that's how I feel. That's how Lillian feels we are. If we're really a team, then we should be there to help each other. It's not about what's in my hand and how am I going to get compensated for what I'm doing. Now, if somebody's really involved, like with Tyler, when he took one of my buyers, he showed him 6 properties, he wrote 3 offers with him, he got the offer accepted, he did the home inspection with him. He had no expectation, but I still paid him $1,000 just for the sake of $1,000. I didn't have to. He gave it back to me and told me not to do it. So I snuck it in his office and left it for him, and then ultimately he took it. But that was my choice because I felt he had gone way above and beyond the call. But there was never an expectation. If you're going to have some type of reciprocal arrangement that isn't just, hey, I'll cover you, you cover me, and there's some fee involved, put it in writing and both of you sign it from the get-go. That's true of whether or not, if you're doing some work together, you're working on, sometimes you guys will work together on something and you're going to split the commission, put it in writing. sign it, both of it, and I want to see that before the transaction happens, not after the transaction. Does that make sense? It's kind of off topic, but appropriate for you to know. Okay. Questions? Any more questions on dual agency for the moment? Okay. Declaration of agency, buyer represents the buyer, is not subject to any earlier, and so we're asking whether or not we're verifying with them signing that paragraph 8C is specific to the fact that they aren't working with somebody else. Okay. Other buyers, second paragraph 8 just says that, okay, there's a possibility I might be working with other buyers that are in the same price range and the same town. I am currently working with 3 buyers in the, $600,000 to $900,000 range that are looking, one of their crossover towns is Andover. I showed a house to 2 different buyers over the weekend. You gotta be careful, right? Thankfully, only one of them wanted to make an offer. If somebody else was gonna make an offer, I need to be very careful on how that's done. And I probably would have went to Louis and said, hey, can you write this offer for me? Because again, I don't want this appearance that I'm favoring one buyer over the other. Okay, it's a rare circumstance that it's going to happen, but just again, the stronger the appearance that you're giving your full undivided attention, the better.
Would you, in that situation,
Yeah.
would you let the buyer that you're gonna be writing the offer for, would you let him know that you had another buyer that someone else is handling, or would you just make that totally invisible?
I would not. I would make it totally transparent. So if I knew that one buyer was going to, so generally you're not going to show a buyer, and then it's unlikely that both people are going to call you at the same time and say, hey, I want to make an offer. So somebody's going to tell you, I want to make an offer. And you either have that knowledge, or you've already written the offer. And if your second buyer says, hey, I want to go see that property, and you go see that property, and then all of a sudden they say you want to write an offer, that's when I'd come clean and say, okay, I've already shown this property to another buyer that has or will be writing an offer. That's about as transparent I'll get. And what I want to do is make sure that you're getting the best possible chance to get this house. So I'm going to ask Lillian over and up to help you with this, because I've already committed to helping the other person. And I don't think it's fair or reasonable to try and do this for both parties interested in the same house.
And then
Okay.
if you guys were to go look at a different house, you would then continue.
Right. It's only for the purposes of writing
That's
that
the
offer,
transaction.
right? And that way I'd have Lillian submit it, right? You guys can always come to me. It's going to be easier coming to me than it will be Lillian, but I'd sit, meet with the clients, write the offer, get the offer presented. Once it's negotiated and done, if it's my buyer that got it or your buyer got it, then you're going to jump back into the fray after that, right? So if it's, I wrote it for your buyer and I got it accepted, then you're going to jump back in after it's accepted and run with the ball to the end. I'm just stepping in to get you out of a situation that doesn't have a great look or feel to it. And we want to make sure that our clients, because we have an ultimate duty to clients, that they're getting the undivided attention to the best degree possible. Make sense?
Yep.
Okay. Happened once in 20 years. So I don't think it's something that's likely to happen, but it's possible. So I don't want it to be a surprise. Equal opportunity just means what? We are not going to discriminate against any of the protected classes. And there are 12 protected classes in the state of Massachusetts and federally? Should I quiz you on them all?
Oh,
No? Okay, we
They
will.
are right
Yeah,
here.
quiz me.
Go ahead, quiz you.
Race, color, religion, national origin, ancestry, sex, age, marital status, handicap, families with children, military status, sexual orientation, or welfare or public assistance status, and all other classes protected by the fair housing laws.
There you go. Okay, the entirety of the agreement and modifications thereof. All that says is that, hey, this is the agreement. Both sides of the page, between the 4 corners of the page, that's it. We can change this agreement, we can add to this agreement, but we can only do so in writing with mutual agreement, acknowledgement by both, acknowledgement being initials and or signatures.
Do
Okay?
you have a lot of people telling you that they want to change the agreement? Or-
No.
Okay.
No. Typically, the only ones that really get into trying to modify the agreement, particularly the listing agreement, are the ones that are attorneys or rely heavily on attorneys. And so at that point, that's generally we're gonna say, you know what? I appreciate your changes. Let me just run them up the flagpole at the office. Okay, until you get some depth of experience under your belts, I don't want you negotiating any complicated changes to the agreement, because it changes the dynamic and the liability depending on what you're changing. Okay, yes, you can change from 3 to 2.5%. Anything else? I'd much rather have you say, you know what, let me just check with in-house counsel. Okay. Yes.
I think we talked about it before, but I forget the time duration of agency. I know the standards.
Mhm.
Is there a similar policy, company policy that we have really negotiate so far?
Yeah, you can negotiate from 6 months down to 6 months.
Oh yeah, so just
6 months.
Yeah.
So no.
We actually thought about
So just 6 months.
Listen,
I don't.
it's 6 months, but if you've got somebody on the hook and you're not sure, then sure. Yeah. What I did early on in my career is I got more comfortable with this and more comfortable with this process. Now I would never negotiate it, but early on in my career, I said, you know what? Tell you what, I'll sign it for a month. And at the end of the month, I'm going to look to extend, because my belief is that after a month of working with me, if we haven't already bought a house, and there's a chance we may not because of the kind of market environment we're in, you're going to be thrilled with my services and you're not going to want to go anywhere anyway. Okay, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with it on the buyer's side. I'm not okay with it on the listing side. Why? Because the listing side, the minute that contract gets signed, there's how many things on your checklist?
a lot of money spent too.
And there's a lot of upfront money that the company spends. So I'm not going to go to 3-month listing contracts, because it's just, it costs us too much money upfront.
And that same thing is the approval from you to change the 6 months.
On the buyer side, I'll give you whatever flexibility. Be ready if I get a contract and I see a copy of a contract that has a week on it or a month on it, expect my phone call.
Yeah.
Okay, and I'm willing to have the discussion with you. I'm not willing to have that discussion. It's non-negotiable on the listing side because of the upfront costs that are associated with it. Okay, the upfront costs are you putting forth and giving them client level services for a period of time as a trial basis. That's you're an independent contractor. That's your business decision to make for yourself.
Okay.
Okay.
Most of the time, do people even talk about the whole 6 months thing?
They'll understand it. It's 6 months isn't a lot.
Yeah.
Especially in this market
There's
environment.
so many reasons that you can give. Like, I mean, if you go to close on property, say you put an offer in like 2 weeks from now, 2 weeks from signing or whatever, it's still gonna be a month and a half, 2 months to.
Yeah, the average time for a closing, good point. The average time for a closing is 45 to 60 days from time of accepted offer. We're actually getting to a point where that time frame is really starting to expand closer to the 60 days because there's so much volume, lender volume, mortgage volume, that the lenders can't get this stuff done in what has been the typical time frames. Okay. The last paragraph is an interesting paragraph. It's called the assignment paragraph. Who wants to take a swipe at what that is?
It's basically saying that the contract can go from our company to a different company,
Yep. And that's, you're correct.
and then it's same thing with the buyers, that they can assign it to a different buyer.
Okay, so what is an assignment? What is a contractual assignment? You're right, you're absolutely right. So good job. What is an assignment? Define an assignment for me.
Someone taking over an agreement,
What's that?
someone taking over a contract,
Okay,
like it's being given to another party.
okay, so it's the transfer, what's called the transfer of an existing contract to another person who basically, and again, I think you're getting to know me well. I try to take these complicated things and break them down into very layman type conversations. Think about it as somebody else stepping in. If it's your contract, you're finding somebody else to step in your shoes and follow the terms and conditions of the contract. Does that make sense?
if you on vacation, or is that what you're saying? Like, if there's a contract signed between you and the buyer and you were to go on vacation, Tyler was to take care of it for you, is that what you're saying? or-
Nope. Nope.
Or not, isn't it?
I'm gonna give you- Let me give you the really long example, and it's a pretty wild example. So back in 2001, this is the only time that I've really come up on this issue. So in 2001, at the time, Lillian had employed a buyer agent that worked specifically for her and worked with all of her buyers. So she had an arrangement with that agent who only worked with Lillian's buyers and got compensated accordingly. She didn't go out and find her own stuff and so on and so forth. And so Lillian had a listing over on Coventry Lane in Andover. So 2001, it was worth 1.1 million. And the 2001 market was probably similar to today's market because it was not uncommon to have multiple offers. It's probably it wasn't as feverish as it is today, but there were lots of them. So she listed the property, and we held all of the showings till the open house. The showing partner, Patty Martin, did the open house, and to the open house came some wild number of people. One of them was an unattached buyer, a buyer not working with an agent. Okay, so she met them at the open house, so she represented who? The seller. Okay, so the people expressed interest in the property. They came back to the office and wrote an offer on the property. Okay, it was one of, I think, about a half a dozen offers that got submitted on it. And it was the prevailing offer. So Lillian was going to double end it with this buyer agent. So the buyer agent working with the buyer, but representing the seller, which they could do lawfully because we just have to be fair and honest with them, got them through the home inspection, negotiated what minor home inspection issues they were, signed a purchase and sale, and then the buyers were off to go do what they needed to do. 5 days before the closing, I get a call from a Coldwell Banker agent. Coldwell Banker agent says, "Hey, Eric, just want to find out, am I sending you or the closing department the commission statement for," I think it was 7 Coventry. I don't remember which number on Coventry. I said, "What are you talking about?" They said, "Well, my buyers are buying it." I said, "Your buyers aren't buying that property. Why are you sending me a commission statement? Our buyers are buying that. Can you send me a copy of the contract?"
So this woman represented both people.
No. What had happened was the buyers that Patty Martin, our agent, worked with, wrote the offer with, went through the home inspection with, got to purchase and sale. The buyers took their contract and through the process of assignment, sold the contract, the purchase and sale contract, to a different buyer. So they sold it to buyer 2. Okay, let's call them buyer 1. So buyer 1 goes out, gets the property under agreement, puts down the deposits, goes through a home inspection, negotiates and signs a purchase and sale agreement. Turns out that buyer number 2 had submitted a competing offer and was devastated that their offer wasn't accepted. They sought out buyer number 1 and said to buyer number 1, "We'll pay you $20,000 if you transfer the contract, if you assign the contract to us. We'll give you your deposits back, all of that fun stuff." Buyer number 1 said, "Okay, we like the house, but we'll go find another house and we'll go make a quick $20,000 just for selling you a contract." And that process of this was called assignment. Now, why is this important and how did this manifest itself? So Eric, 5 days before closing, gets the agent working for buyer number 2, says, "I'm sending you my commission statement." Okay, what do you think Eric says? Eric and Logan say, because Eric was a young buck and didn't know what I was doing then.
Oh boy, oh boy.
What do you think Eric and Lillian say to the agent? Don't know what you're talking about, but let's get to closing. Okay. here's what happened when we went to closing. Now, this was a really, really nasty divorce. Our client, the seller, the wife and the husband, it was a knockdown, drag out fight every time you got the two of them on the phone. So just as a side, because it's about all the weird things that happen in real estate. So I'm covering all of this for Lillian because she was traveling at the time. And so one, we have this agent now that has never been involved in any of it until 5 days before closing. We have this buyer who bought the contract from our buyer, so our buyer is no longer involved, right? I have an obligation as a realtor to do what? For those of you, I don't know if any of you have been through the orientation yet, Code of Ethics says you have an obligation as a realtor to cooperate, but not compensate. So we went to the closing and then we said to the agent, we're not giving you a fee. Okay? They turned around and filed what's called a procuring cause. Write that one down, procuring cause. They filed a procuring cause grievance with the Board of Realtors, which then initiated a whole other set of stuff. But let me finish the story about the closing. So forget about the fact that we're about to tell this agent, go pound sand. I go to the walkthrough, because now we've got buyers we have never dealt with. We've got another agent involved that we have to cooperate with. And we go to this $1.1 million house, and there is literally, the house is still, the morning of the closing, there's still furniture in half the rooms. And oh, by the way, there's dog poop on the kitchen floor, in the hallway up on the second floor, in 2 of the 4 bedrooms, and in the basement.
What does dog eat?
It was the callousness of the divorce that this was one of the spouses getting back at the other spouse to try and create pain and so on and so forth. It was dog. Oh no, it was dog. There were dogs running all over the place. So we had the seller address that. The truck, although it's not there and it wasn't that truck, it was the first truck we had. I pulled that truck over there and we're literally loading furniture in because we got to get this thing to closing. So we do another walkthrough later in the day. The dog poop's gone, the furniture's gone, and at least it's out of the house. It's all sitting on the front yard. That was the compromise that we had. So this is a $1.1 million house. So we go to the Registry of Deeds, because back then that was the only place you really did closings. And we're at the Registry of Deeds, and you're sitting in at the Registry of Deeds, and at the end of the month, it's packed. And there used to be 5, 6, or 8, or 10 tables, and you'd have buyer and husband and wife sitting there, sellers, husband and wife sitting there, realtor, the closing attorney, sometimes the selling attorney. You could have 5, 6, 8 people there, right? And the registry closes at 4 o'clock. So we are at 3:55 p.m. We're trying to get, I've got the wife there who's been our main contact. The ex-husband is nowhere to be found. He's not answering his calls. His attorney he's not answering his attorney's calls. His attorneys is now not answering our calls. We couldn't even get this thing closed. He shows up at 3:58 and says to everybody, fuck all of you. I'm at the top of his voice in front of probably 60 people. Fuck all of you. I'm not closing today because there was an assignment of contract and you can't assign the contract. It was a fun day.
That was before you had a sign on the contract, though, right?
What?
That was before you had.
That was before we had the assignments and non-assignment clause in the contract. So that's where that came from. So we got that closed. We were able to get the attorneys together. And I literally said, if you've ever been to Lawrence, at the old courthouse where the registry used to be, there's a bar there, it may not be there now, called the Aztec Bar. At 7:30 on a Friday night at the end of the month, later that night, we literally were sat there at this bar and did the closing. But, go ahead.
Was he right about the assignment?
He was.
Oh, okay.
Right? He didn't, there was language that kind of alluded to that he couldn't do it, but it wasn't very clear. So ultimately, his attorney talked him off the ledge and we closed. But now let's go to the procuring cause. What is procuring cause? Procuring cause, here's the definition of it that you need to know, because you'll hear the term. It is the chain of unbroken events that leads to the sale of a home or a property. Okay, and the operative word there is the chain of unbroken events. Okay, and there's 75, literally probably 75 different aspects to that that can factor into that as to whether you're not. So here's what happened when we told the agent, thank you, we'll cooperate with you. And when we got to the closing and she said, where's your check? I said, you're not getting the check, we're not paying you.
So they were suing you for
Well, there's no,
you guys not helping.
essentially what's happened is that when you're a realtor, we as realtors agree that we're not gonna go out into the court system and sue each other. So we go back through this process of filing a grievance with the board of realtors that we exist with. So it's
Okay.
almost like an arbitration, it's a self-governing. And so she filed the grievance, or her office filed the grievance with the Northeast Association of Realtors, and they had this 5 or 6 page explanation as to why they were due the fee. I had to, well, I'm gonna tell you, so I had to respond with our attorneys with a 5 or 6 page response. We got pulled into this grievance committee hearing. There's literally, they had 3 attorneys on that side, we had us and our attorney in there, and we went back and forth. And ultimately what happened was we didn't have to pay a fee. Because our argument was, the sale went through. We're not denying this agent that you worked with buyer number 2. We're not disputing that in any way. But what we're saying to you is that buyer number 2, by buying the contract and having the contract assigned to them, stepped into the shoes of buyer number 1, which we did all the work for. We wrote the offer, we went to the home inspection, we helped negotiate the purchase and sale. It was the contract that was written as a result of our effort that ultimately resulted in the purchase of the house by buyer number 2. And the board agreed with us.
If you weren't there.
Okay, so break out your calculators, $1.1 million times 2.5%, because that's what we were offering out on that property. What is that gross commission income?
I didn't get there in time for you.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
$1,100,000 times 0.025. $27,500. Why is that important? Because that was the money that the agent asked us for that we said, no, we weren't going to give to you. And the board ruled in our favor. So one of our arguments was, hey, not only do we not owe you the fee, but do you have a buyer's contract? You should really need to go back to your buyer to get your fee. Where's your buyer's contract? And her answer was, I don't have one. So she did all this work for nothing. So besides all the other great learning opportunities in terms of procuring cause and assignment of contracts, if nothing else, if you take nothing else away from this example, do not work with buyers without a buyer agency contract, because what's going to happen? Something's probably going to happen where you don't get paid. Yes, sir.
If that agent down there.
Yep.
Used this contract.
Or had their own buyer contract, doesn't matter to me what the contract was. If they had a similar contract with them, then that buyer would have been obligated to pay that agent.
The buyer, not us.
Right, buyer number 2.
Because
Right.
they bought a home within that time period.
Because they were under contract with that agent to help them find a house. The agent found them a house, put them in contact with buyer number 1. They bought the contract from buyer number 1. So buyer number 1 assigned the contract to them. Buyer number 2 had to step in the shoes of buyer number 1, but follow the terms of the contract that they bought. She said, hey, Lillian Montalto Signature Properties, you're offering 2.5%, and unless I'm entitled to that, we gave her the big middle finger and said, no, you're not. She took us to arbitration. We went to arbitration and we won. Because buyer number 2 was acting as if they were buyer number 1, acting on their behalf, not necessarily on their behalf, but acting as them. Okay, and that's the difference between an assignment and a nominee. A nominee is somebody acting on your behalf versus somebody acting as you.
Is that allowed?
It can be.
Is another example of an assignment. I was studying test, and I remember when, say, someone has a lease, a lease agreement, and they find someone else because they have to move for a job or something, and so they assign, the lease to a new person, and they take over the full responsibility. Is that common?
It would not be, an assignment would not be common in a lease situation, residential or commercial. Generally,
Okay.
what that's referred to as a sublease. So I'm the lessee. I've signed the lease. I've got to relocate. Luch says he's willing to rent the property so that I'm not having to pay out of pocket for a place I'm not living at. He pays me, but my name's still on the lease. I have an agreement with him, but my agreement is still with the landlord. I'm still on the hook for that lease, but I might have him pay the landlord whatever, but that's called a sublease.
Okay.
Car leases get assigned. Those are the ones that get assigned.
I did see it when I was studying, but I knew a sublease. There was you had to know both definitions for the test. I don't know. I just got a little confused, I guess.
Okay. Questions?
So
Okay.
buyer number,
Yes.
so agent 2 got paid 0 because of what happened, but buyer 2 still had to pay you guys the $27,500.
Buyer didn't have to pay us anything because it was the contract was between us and the seller, right? So we have an exclusive right to sell listing agreement. We charged them 5%. We said through MLS, so we got to keep 2.5% for the listing side. Buyer agent number 2 said, hey, wait a second, you're offering 2.5% in MLS, that unilateral of offer of compensation. I'm the procuring cause, so you owe me that fee. We had an argument about whether she was the procuring cause or not. She presented her facts, we presented our facts. It was ruled in our favor that we were the procuring cause because we were the one that worked with buyer number 1, wrote the offer, got them through home inspection, got them through purchase and sale, and it was that purchase and sale that buyer number 2 stepped into the shoes as if they were buyer number 1 and followed the terms and conditions of that contract, which we were involved with, which we caused to happen. Okay, so buyer number 2 got off, the only thing they had to buy, whatever they paid buyer number 1, which I think was a $20,000 fee for the contract itself. Buyer number 2 unfortunately wasn't smart enough, which is hard to believe because she was a decent agent. Buyer number 2 never had an agreement with her. Had she had an exclusive right to buy agreement, buyer number 2 would have had to have paid her fee. Right? If she had gotten a fee from us, then buyer number 2 wouldn't have owed that fee more than likely, if their contract's similar to ours, and it is. But there was no contract. Right? So there was no contract between her and the buyer, so they're not going to pay her. And she mistakenly thought that we were going to be obligated to pay her because she happens to be the agent with the buyer that bought the property. No, not in that particular case, because again, it was because of our efforts, we created that chain of that unbroken chain of events that caused it to happen. Now, granted, how often do you see an assignment of a contract in real estate? You might start seeing them a little bit now, where it's possible that in these multiple offer situations, somebody might go seek out the buyer that got the deal and buy the contract. It's a rare day in Massachusetts. It does happen a lot more out on the West Coast and the Southwest and things like that, but not here. But because of that particular chain of events, and the buyer number 2 ultimately bought the property as a result of the contract we effectively negotiated, we're entitled to the fee. That was found. Okay, it's a complicated discussion. You now know more of it than probably any other agent out there, other than this agent who is now practicing part-time. Yes, ma'am.
How would the buyers even know each other? I feel like, aren't you not supposed to
I
disclose?
believe, if memory serves me correctly, there was this buy. I believe the agent knew those buyers on a personal level and was aware that they were buying it, I think, and she had worked with these folks. Their offer they lost out in the multiple offer situation. There was obviously some discussion between them, which is, in theory, is fine. She called them and set up the discussion. I don't know the mechanics of how that happened, other than I know there was a mutual contact, and this one got in touch with that one and they did the deal.
Yeah.
Talking that she didn't get
Yeah.
the signs.
But again, 2001, we were probably one of the only companies ever doing it at that particular time. Right now, I would tell you that while there are other companies doing it more regularly, nobody is getting the extra fees like we're getting. Why? Because as Nicole will teach you, and I want you to sit with her for a buyer consultation because she does it very well. You get paid what your value is, and you only get paid what your value is if you communicate it effectively. And I think I've only seen her discounted 2.5% of the 20 deals that I can know off the top of my head that she's done, plus in the last year and a half. More than that, actually. Every single one of them has been at 3%. There is no reason for you not to get it. Okay? I would say that the only reason is, hey, it's my brother. I'll give him 2.5% to do. But even all of her friends, and she's selling a lot of homes to her friends now, even her friends are paying it. Okay? But give her credit, she comes from a luxury retail background, which makes it a little bit easier because her whole life at Gucci was, yeah, that's a $5,000 purse. It's not being discounted. Buy it or don't buy it. Right? But here's why you want to buy a $5,000 purse. I can't articulate that because I don't understand that mentality. But as long as I've been married, sorry, still can't figure it out. Other than, sure, honey, if it makes you happy, no problem. Okay?
Oh, the purses.
What's that?
I said, oh, the purses.
The purses, the boots, the shoes, I get it, I understand. Questions about any of what we've talked about today? Okay, so we're on for tomorrow, 2 to 4. We're going to role play this a little bit, okay, the whole thing. I'll start off, just because we're running late today, I'll start off with my presentation of it, and then we're gonna role play. So just be familiar with it, okay? Any questions?
No, thank you.
Okay. So, thank you.
This is a question about this, but is the seller's exclusive right to sell similar to the buyer's one?
In what way? I'm not sure I understand. It is because it's an exclusive contract, an exclusive service contract, yes.
I haven't seen it yet, so I didn't know if it went over the same things.
Well, conceptually, there are, at the high level, it's the same thing, right? It's an exclusive service contract that you're entering into on behalf of the company with the client. The terms and conditions are much different. The things that are same would be paragraph 8 about the consent to dual agency, because remember, you have to have in writing how you disclose to them, which is the about dual agency, which is the Massachusetts Mandatory Real Estate Licensee Disclosure Relationship Form. You have to have informed written consent, which is paragraph 8 of this document, as well as the exclusive right to sell listing agreement. And then you would provide notice in writing at the time of offer, which is a separate form that says notice of dual agency. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, I can't wait to see that. Thank you.
They're right in the mailroom if you want one. They make for great reading. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Hope-
Bye.
Bye.
I said the F word on tape, didn't I? I'm in trouble now.